If you think modern saturation divers equipped with cutting-edge technology have faced the most gruesome deaths imaginable, then you likely haven't heard the story of Robert Peter. Travel back to the year 1755 to a barren outcrop of rock in the open sea where the Eddystone Lighthouse stood firm against the violent swells of the English Channel. This was an era when light was born from towering candles and animal tallow, and lighthouse keepers served as solitary guardians for every vessel navigating those treacherous waters. Yet on a frigid winter night, a 94-year-old man named Robert Peter confronted an enemy that no physician or scientist of his time would have believed a human being could survive for even a single minute. Can you imagine someone swallowing a stream of molten metal and remaining lucid enough to argue with doctors that he was burning from the inside out? If you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place, because that's all we do here. We upload new stories several times a week. So if that's of interest to you, please hit the subscribe button and turn on all notifications. Also, please gently sneak into the like button's house. Take all the batteries out of their TV remote and hide them in the back of the freezer. Then, just casually walk out of the front door like nothing ever happened. Now, let's get into today's stories. On the night of December 2nd, 1755, Robert Peter was carrying out his watch. At 94, his body was frail, but the resolve of a keeper had not dimmed. The Eddystone Lighthouse in those days was constructed largely of wood and stone, crowned by an enormous lantern enclosed beneath a lead dome. While inspecting the candles at the topmost level, Robert detected an unfamiliar acrid smell. It was not the ordinary scent of rendered fat, but the unmistakable odor of smoldering timber. Within seconds, flames erupted from the lantern roof, where years of accumulated grease had turned the structure into perfect fuel. In the chaos that followed, Robert did not flee. The 94-year-old man began hauling heavy buckets of water, climbing the steep stairways in a desperate attempt to contain the blaze. Picture the scene. A man nearly a century old, standing amid a ring of fire at the summit of a tower, surrounded by ocean, wind shrieking and waves crashing below. As he tilted his head back to throw a bucket of water toward the burning dome, one of the most extraordinary tragedies in medical history unfolded. The inferno's heat melted the lead lining of the dome overhead. In the instant Robert opened his mouth to gasp for breath, a stream of red-hot, liquefied lead poured down from above, falling straight into his mouth and sliding down his throat. Pause and consider what that means. Lead melts at approximately 327 degrees Celsius. This was not a careless sip of scalding coffee. It was a dense, heavy, incandescent metal flowing through his esophagus, searing every tissue in its path before plunging into his stomach. Robert collapsed, his scream cut short by the weight of the metal ravaging him from within. And yet, the human instinct to survive can defy explanation. Despite severe burns and the sensation of being heated from the inside, he managed to crawl downward, escaping the flames that were consuming the lighthouse. When rescuers from the mainland arrived the following morning, they found Robert lying on the rocks, his body scorched and trembling. As they transported him ashore, he repeatedly murmured what sounded to everyone like madness. "I swallowed molten lead. It's in my stomach." In the 18th century, medical knowledge was rudimentary. The physician who treated him, Edward Spry, examined the 94-year-old and shook his head. He assumed Robert had suffered psychological shock or inhaled too much toxic smoke and was now hallucinating. "Sir," Spry reportedly told him, "had you swallowed even a drop of molten lead, you would have died instantly. No one could survive such a thing." Other doctors agreed, attributing his abdominal pain to external burns and exposure to hot fumes. But Robert Peter persisted in his account. For the next 12 days, he lay in his bed in agony beyond modern comprehension. Imagine it, a heavy mass of metal, cooled and solidified into a hardened lump inside your stomach, while burns along your esophagus begin to suppurate. Yet he was able to consume small amounts of liquid nourishment and converse coherently. His survival over those 12 days challenged every biological assumption of the era. On the 12th day, Robert died. Dr. Spry, driven by both curiosity and lingering doubt, performed a post-mortem examination. When he opened the old man's stomach, the room fell silent. There was something solid and weighty resting at the bottom. When Spry removed it, he held an oval piece of lead, smooth and dense, weighing more than 200 grams, about 7 ounces. The metal had traveled down the throat, settled in the stomach, then cooled into what was effectively a perfect cast of its interior base. Shaken, Dr. Spry wrote to the Royal Society of London to report the case. And yet the response bordered on the absurd. The Royal Society dismissed his account, suggesting he was fabricating the story for notoriety, because according to the scientific understanding of the time, no person could survive swallowing molten metal. Determined to prove his claim, Spry conducted cruel experiments on animals, pouring molten lead down the throats of dogs and cats to observe their survival. The results showed that several animals lived for days afterward, demonstrating that the body could endure the initial shock longer than previously believed. Robert Peters' story is more than a rare accident. It is the story of a man who spoke the truth and was not believed because that truth was too horrific to accept. It is the story of the extraordinary endurance of a 94-year-old lighthouse keeper who stood guard over the sea, only to be punished by the very roof above him. Today, if you visit the National Museum of Scotland, you will find a peculiar artifact displayed behind glass. It is a dull gray piece of lead, seemingly inert and lifeless. But when you look at it, remember that it was once incandescent, that it once flowed down a human throat, and that it rested inside Robert Peters' stomach during the final 12 days of his life. Have you ever wondered what crossed his mind in the instant that molten stream descended? Did he regret not fleeing the lighthouse? Or did he feel pride that, until his last breath, he fulfilled his duty as a keeper of the light? A stream of molten metal could not extinguish his will, but it left humanity with one of the strangest and darkest accounts ever recorded. 200 miles off the coast of Scotland, out in the vast, indifferent Atlantic, there exists a world untouched by sunlight. Down there, Roger, Baldwin, and Peter Holmes were surviving inside a network of loosely connected steel cylinders bolted together in the crushing depths of the sea. At that depth, darkness is not merely the absence of light. It feels like a living presence, something watchful and patient. People often say that maintaining offshore oil rigs is the most dangerous job on Earth. But the real threat does not come from mythical deep-sea monsters. It comes from the deadly silence of pressure systems. That night, a trap was sprung, and 2 men were about to endure one of the most horrific underwater nightmares ever recorded. Why, at 10 o'clock that evening, were Roger, a vibrant 24-year-old, and Peter, his seasoned 29-year-old colleague, forced to crawl on their hands and knees through a narrow metal corridor instead of walking upright like ordinary men? Why did their lungs wheeze like punctured tires? And why did their vision begin to blur behind a strange, suffocating fog, as if they had slipped into another dimension? The answer lay in a technical procedure engineered to the millimeter, one that, in a single careless instant, was transformed into a brutal death sentence. To understand what happened, you have to understand that saturation diving is nothing like strapping on a tank to admire coral reefs. Working hundreds of meters below the surface subjects the human body to immense pressure. Ascend too quickly, and the gases dissolved in your bloodstream. Nitrogen, helium, expand violently, forming bubbles that block vessels and shred tissue, a condition known as decompression sickness. To prevent that, these divers live for weeks inside a pressurized chamber system on the deck of a ship, where the internal pressure matches that of the seabed. They leave only to enter a diving bell, an armored elevator of sorts, that lowers them to the ocean floor to work. That night, Roger and Peter had just completed an exhausting shift at the base of the oil platform. They climbed into the diving bell, sealed the hatch, and signaled the crew above to haul them up. Everything proceeded flawlessly until the bell was locked into the living chamber system aboard the vessel. According to protocol, a deck operator named Thompson was supposed to adjust the valves, equalizing the pressure between the bell and the chamber before opening the connecting hatch. But the North Sea at night is a violent beast. Wind howled like the wails of the drowned. Waves slammed against the hull, sending tremors through the massive steel structure. Machinery roared so loudly that human voices were swallowed whole. In that chaos, under relentless pressure, Thompson made a mistake that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He released the hatch lock while the internal pressure was still dozens of times higher than the atmospheric pressure outside. Have you ever wondered what happens when an extreme high-pressure environment is breached without warning? It is not like a bomb exploding with fire and smoke. It is destruction at the cellular level. A thunderous boom tore through the night, shaking the oil platform to its core. The connecting hatch blasted away like a leaf in a storm. The compressed gas inside the chamber escaped at the speed of sound. In that instant, Roger and Peter felt as if an enormous hand had reached inside their bodies and twisted their organs with merciless force. As the pressure plummeted from saturation levels to near zero, the helium bubbles that had rested harmlessly in their bloodstream suddenly expanded. Imagine shaking a soda bottle to its limit and then cracking it open, the violent eruption of foam and gas. That was what happened inside their blood and tissues. The pain defies language. It was not a cut, not a broken bone. It was the sensation of the entire body boiling from within, every nerve fiber seared and snapped in rapid succession. A dense white fog formed instantly as the sudden loss of pressure caused a sharp temperature drop. Roger and Peter were hurled against the steel walls, their lungs cinched tight as though bound by an invisible rope, unable to draw in even a fragment of oxygen. And yet the most primitive human force, the instinct to survive, ignited within them. Through delirium and unimaginable agony, they understood that if they failed to seal the door separating the sleeping chamber, where a trace of pressure still remained from the ruptured section, the entire system would catastrophically fail, killing them within seconds. That is why they crawled. Roger Baldwin, his vision smeared as blood began seeping from his pores and the corners of his eyes, reached forward. He could not stand. The expanding gas was ravaging his joints and bones. He dragged himself over jagged metal fragments, gripping freezing pipes for leverage. Peter Holmes followed close behind, clutching Roger's leg, the two of them inching across the steel floor like wounded animals struggling back toward shelter. On deck, the rescue team stood frozen. Through reinforced glass, they watched the pressure gauge needle plunge to zero. They knew their friends were inside, enduring the most excruciating pain a human being can survive. Yet they could do nothing. Opening the hatch to attempt a rescue would trigger a cascading pressure failure, killing the other divers in adjacent chambers. It was an unbearable dilemma. Watch colleagues be torn apart or cause an even greater catastrophe with their own hands. Inside, Roger finally reached the lever of the steel door. With the last fragments of his strength, with the stubborn will of a man refusing to die at the bottom of the sea, he pulled. The heavy door slammed shut with a hollow metallic clang. The gas leak slowed. Pressure began to stabilize slightly as technicians above rushed to pump emergency gas back into the system. But the price had already been paid. Their bodies had been devastated beyond measure. Roger and Peter collapsed onto the floor, chests rising faintly under the dim emergency lights. What followed was a desperate race against death, and it was not a race humanity would win. Medical teams worked frantically to recalibrate pressure levels, trying to bring them into a state stable enough for surgery. But medicine in that moment was little more than a futile gesture. Peter Holmes, the 29-year-old who had fought to his final breath beside his friend, did not survive. He exhaled his last breath on that cold steel floor. Roger Baldwin survived, but survived hardly captures what remained of him afterward. He carried permanent scars across his body, yet the deeper wounds were carved into his mind. Night after night, he dreamed of the shriek of escaping gas, of Peter's desperate eyes, of the blinding white fog inside that steel coffin. He had come so close to death, he felt he could smell it. He never returned to the sea. This story is a chilling reminder of the cost of progress. To power the modern world, there are men who accept life inside steel coffins, wagering everything on the turn of a valve or the tick of a pressure gauge. Have you ever wondered whether, each time we switch on a light or start a car, we owe people like Roger and Peter a silent debt of gratitude? Because sometimes life is not measured in years, but in the number of centimeters you can crawl across a steel floor to close the door that separates you from the void. And this is only the first story in a chain of strange events I intend to share with you today. That's going to do it for today's stories. If you enjoyed this video, please let us know by leaving a comment and telling us what you thought about these cases. Or if you have any theories of your own, I'd love to hear them. Thank you so much for your support, and until next time, we'll see ya.